you so much, Joe, for continuing to update us, to make this movement practical and understanding the times in which we live. So you're an amazing asset to us. So what kind of updates do you have for us now?
Sure. Well, happy to be with everybody. And just some disclaimers up front. As you mentioned, I'm no longer employed by Alliance Defending Freedom. I did retire from them at the end of last year. And I still have a law practice part-time. I'm doing more pastoral work now. So nothing I say should be taken as ADF's position on any particular issue. With that disclaimer, kind of launching into things quickly now, there's a lot to be watching for. Religious liberty touches so many areas. I'll start with the Supreme Court. Probably the most important thing from the Supreme Court, closest in time to us, is in the next 2 weeks, we will get a decision on a case called Fulton versus City of Philadelphia. It was argued back in November of 2020. Fulton, I think, is the most important religious liberty case of the term. That's a case where Catholic Social Services was barred from placing children in foster homes because their faith-informed belief was that they would not place with same-sex couples. And interestingly, they did this many, many decades. Everybody was happy with the arrangement, but these things are no longer acceptable now to people pushing on the other side. And when they were contacted, they would make a referral to an agency that did. It went into the Supreme Court record that there was not a single same-sex couple ever declined a placement for foster care because they were acting according to their conscience. But now that's no longer acceptable. When I was at ADF, we had a similar case in New York and we won on appeal. And now the case has gone to the Supreme Court. The question is, if you have religious beliefs on something like marriage, the meaning of marriage or the meaning of gender, can government exclude you from all government programs, participation? And we'll see a lot more on this. The argument went fairly well. We are cautiously optimistic, as the old saying goes. This court, despite some odd and unpredictable turns and veers, seems to be pretty good on religious liberty. Also, the Supreme Court this term, and I'm not making any political statement of any sort, please don't read into it. There will also be decisions in the next few weeks, you'll hear them in the news, on election law cases and voting rights, whether states can ban the practices like ballot harvesting. And there will also be a decision on the future of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. And how those might affect churches or ministries is hard to tell right now. Remember, the Affordable Care Act was the subject of a case we had at the Supreme Court when I was back at ADF on whether Hobby Lobby could be required to pay for abortifacients that violated their conscience. And Hobby Lobby won that case at the Supreme Court. Also at the Supreme Court, some other major things that I think are on the horizon. We'll be looking for a decision out of California. The case was argued. Decision on whether the state, in this case the state of California, can compel religious nonprofits to disclose the names of their donors in their tax returns. The reason a lot of donors didn't want to do this is because now with the new phenomenon of outing and the changes in society, when people support causes now that may be deemed, politically incorrect or whatever, they're now subject to all kinds of harassment and they don't want their names out there. And California is notorious for allowing leaks to happen of those names. Very possibly could be insiders who decide they're just going to do it and try to do it in a way that nobody can figure it out or nobody can figure out the source of it. Then finally at the Supreme Court, the court accepted a case that has the potential to totally rewrite the abortion laws in the nation. This was a case out of Mississippi. The state of Mississippi enacted a ban on abortions if for somebody pregnant more than 15 weeks, with only two exceptions. One is medical emergencies, and the other is what the state calls severe fetal abnormalities. And when the Supreme Court accepted this case, the advocates on the side of the Mississippi law suggested to the court it may be time to reconsider Roe v. Wade. And that could be on the calendar for the court to consider that. They may redo the whole Roe v. Wade framework as modified a few years later by another case they decided called Casey versus Planned Parenthood. And, the big question is what will happen with Amy Coney Barrett replacing Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And it seems like there may be enough votes to actually overturn Roe v. Wade. So we don't know what's going to happen with that. Kind of moving quick because I have very limited time. There's a lot happening in the public education realm, and the public education realm is intersecting sort of the latest transgender ideology. We had at ADF, I say we, I'm not longer included in that we, but it's a hard habit to break after all these years. We had a win in a case called Meriwether against Shawnee State, where a professor did not want to use the student's preferred pronoun if it defied, and the professor was a Christian, if it denied God's objective creation. So the professor said, look, I'll refer to a person by their name, by any name. I don't care what name they want to use. If Bill wants to be Belinda, I'll say Belinda, but I'm not going to refer to Bill, whom I know to be a biological male, as she. I'm not going to use that adjective. I'll just avoid adjectives, altogether. And the university said that's not good enough and fired them. And we had a wonderful win at the Sixth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. But a lot of things are happening. We've represented students, the president of a student senate who was removed for his private opinions on marriage and sex. I believe he was Catholic, if I'm recalling correctly. And we had to sue the university because the university removed him as student president. So we're seeing this increasingly. We still have a case going on for Dr. Alan Josephson, who built up the Department of Psychiatry at Louisville University into one of the finest in the land. And then in a private conference, he offered the opinion that psychiatry has always said we should try to conform a person's identity to their body and not vice versa, because what we know from psychiatry is that up to 90% of the time, if we do nothing with adolescents and let them go through puberty, their confusion resolves in favor of their biology. This is just known science. Nobody disputes it. And now we're rushing to do things like give hormone suppressants, taking young people who are not old enough to enter into a legal contract or serve their country in the military or drive a car, but we're saying that they have the maturity to make decisions, on changing their gender or maybe having surgery, and that parents shouldn't have rights in that any longer. So we are watching a number of those cases. Some of those cross over into parental rights. The transgender issue will just continue to grow, and the other side is pushing it relentlessly and really threatening and intimidating anybody who would speak to the contrary. And one of the things I've noticed in life is the more preposterous your position is, the more it denies just common sense or what anybody could tell. I talk to my grandkids and my grandson already understands this and says, Papa, a boy is a boy and a girl's a girl. And I said, you're absolutely right. The more you have to force people to deny what they know to be true objectively, the more intense the state pressure becomes, the more Orwellian the feel. I always think of the character in 1984, who is at the end is just, how can I say that, whatever the equation was, 2 + 2 = 5, when I know it's not? And the government officials reply, you can, because if Big Brother tells you it is, you have to believe it. I mean, we're approaching those kinds of things. Just an update on our client, Jack Phillips. He's the baker. We call him the cake artist in public, because he is very much a cake artist. He had a win at the Supreme Court against the state of Colorado that he was not required to create cakes with messages of which he disapproved. And by the way, he had other messages he would not do as well. He would not do messages that were obscene, that were racist. He wouldn't make cakes with alcohol because he had a problem at one time. When the Supreme Court realized he's the only person being compelled, when we asked commissioners, would you compel an African-American to create a cake for the KKK? Never. Would you compel a Jewish baker to make a Holocaust, a Nazi cake? Never. And nobody was ever compelled to make anything except a Christian on this subject. Jack Phillips just went through a trial. We're waiting for a decision after we won against the state on both sexual orientation and then gender identity. A transgender activist sued him and set it up by demanding that he bake a cake that was pink on the inside and blue on the outside to celebrate his gender transition. So I'm just going to wrap up very quickly here to tell you some of the things we're watching for now are the current administration's administrative policies. Even if Congress doesn't do something, there's a lot of flexibility at the administrative level to enforce things. We're seeing lots of administrative agencies now push concepts of sexual orientation and gender identity into things. When I was at ADF, we were filing lawsuits on those. Part of what the administration is getting into now is allowing biological male athletes to run against women. The track records in the state of Connecticut now for women are now all held by biological men who are still physically male. They haven't had surgery, they haven't done anything, but they identify as female, and we were making the arguments it's destroying women's sports. It's destroying women's privacy. It's destroying what the federal laws in Title IX were trying to do to give women equal opportunities and equality. So there's interesting litigation taking place in Idaho and Connecticut. We lost in the first round in Connecticut, not a surprise. We didn't think that we drew a favorable judge. These cases will be going up on appeal. Remains to see what the Supreme Court will do. I'll take my closing 2 minutes to just mention something you all should be aware of, and that is the so-called Equality Act. And I could spend a day on the Equality Act and what's in it and how you could be preparing yourself in your church. I'm just going to have to popcorn these points. Some of the things that the Equality Act does, if Congress passes it, and there seems to be a decent chance that they will. Number one, it eviscerates religious freedom. The federal law called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that was passed in 1993 is now gone, and discrimination claims no longer has any effect. That was the law that we used to win for Hobby Lobby when we had that win at the Supreme Court. Two, it adds the word sex to a number of federal laws in a way that probably makes abortion a right on the federal level. So it would overturn states that want to have more restrictive laws. Number three, it makes gender identity basically an unlimited concept. It discusses gender identity as something like identity, appearances, mannerisms, or any gender-related characteristics. We have to accept those all as gender identity, including the concept of gender fluidity, that I can today decide I'm a man, tomorrow I'm a woman, the day after I feel like a man again. And we all have to go along with this sort of, craziness. It will also threaten religious exemptions in federal law. It may even lead to ultimately an attack on federal tax exemption based on a case that the Supreme Court decided some years ago. If gender identity and sexual orientation are in federal laws, Christian schools that take part in federal programs, if students get government loans and all that, would suddenly be excluded from the programs. It's very, very severe legislation. And it would expand the idea of public accommodations, which used to be things like hotels and restaurants. In a right law, in a sensible law, you can't discriminate against people if you're a public accommodation on the basis of race, religion, sex, and things like that. Actually, the federal laws are more restrictive. They were focused primarily on race. It suddenly is going to include all kinds of things, including gender identity, and it's going to include all kinds of places now. Will churches be included because they open to the public? They're going to argue that. And we're going to have to see if churches' constitutional rights are strong enough to overturn those things. There are ways churches can be prepared. There are things they can do about their bylaws. Obviously, I can't go into any of that right now. I'll just conclude with this thought. The law, if passed, will also affect employment laws, and the Supreme Court's already done something like that in a decision. Housing laws and what we call federal laws that refer to as Title VIII, women's sports and Title IX, and on and on. It basically pushes this on the nation and probably forces even public schools, if they want to get federal money, to at some point affirm that they're teaching gender fluidity, going against parental wishes. So there's an awful lot on the table. I've given you sort of the near term, the farther term. It looks to me in the natural like it's likely to get worse before it gets better. So there's never been a time it's more important for churches to be prepared, understand their rights, and frankly, to stand firm in a culture that will be increasingly hostile. So that's it.
Well, we'll definitely have to talk more about this at one of the global tables. Also, as a benefit to those who join USCAL, you get this kind of consultation from a man like Joe Infranco, pro bono, and it's important that we all stick together. At this time,